Good morning, sunshines. Welcome to a new semester. Ooh. Hopefully you've got your syllabus. Hopefully you understand it. If you don't, give me a call or give me an email. Ask any questions you have. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit about analyzing plays. It's a little different than analyzing other things, simply because you're going towards a performance, whereas in other sources, if you're analyzing a book or a painting or that sort of stuff, there are certainly aspects of it which will carry through, but you're not really having to deal with a reality-based production at the end of it. So one of the things about analyzing a play that you need to understand, even though it may not be your particular job to analyze and come up with answers to everything, you need to at least go through the process and understand the process, so that when you're collaborating with your other designers, with other people on the production crew, they understand the importance of having things done and why things are done the way they're done. So again, some of this is just for the understanding of the process. Some of it is just to go through and understand what it is that you're trying to do and trying to look at without having to deal with anything about theater at all. Again, on the next class period, we'll talk about things like stage right, stage left, and all the things that are specific to theater. But this is just a little chance to sit down and talk about, if you have a script, the first thing you want to do obviously is read it. No matter what you're doing with it, if you're a stage manager, if you're a director, if you're a light designer or sound designer, anything that you're going to do in the theater, the first step is just to read it, to know what it is that you're going to do. Now we're going to talk about analyzing play in 7 specific areas. There are many other ways to analyze a script, and we'll get into those through the course of the semester, and they will lead, a lot of times those type of things. For instance, one of the ways you can analyze a script or analyze a performance of a play is by going to the theater you're going to perform it in. So the theater has a certain shape, certain size. It may have wings, it may not have wings, it may have a fly space, it may not have fly space, and those things can impact the performance and the production and the interpretation of the play. But for now, we're just going to stick with the script itself. Budgets, for instance, are things you could analyze. I mean, obviously, if you're doing a show on Broadway and you're going to have $1 million budget, there's just an anticipated production quality that's going to be there at the end that may not be there if you've got a $500 budget and you're doing it at a community theater. Nothing against community theater. Again, I'm going to use this word integrity. The thing that makes a good show good, in my opinion, is having integrity. If a person or a production or a group of individuals doing a play feels like they have put their best foot forward and they are trying their darndest, whether it be a high school or whether it be Broadway, there's a certain integrity the show has. If they're just going through the motions, trust me, their shows have been running on Broadway for 10, 15 years. Those people are brain dead. Yes, I'm not saying all of them. But the potential for actors to just be going through the motions is high, because it's just something they do every single day. And so again, just because you're paying $300 a ticket doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see a better production with a higher integrity than you're going to see at your local college or high school. Because again, the want and the will and the desire is what the important thing a lot of times. Obviously, a Broadway actor is going to have more training, they're going to have more experience. The quality of work they're going to do because of that, because they've trained their voice and because they've trained their bodies and all that sort of stuff, thing is going to be experienced, because it's going to be give it a little bit stronger quality. But the integrity is the thing that you can attack as a director, as a stage manager, no matter what level of production you're working at. Yes? All right, so let's just dive into the 7 basic areas of play analysis. And the first is given circumstances. Given circumstances is just what you need to know about the people and the places in the play. What time period is the play being done? Is it set in, we're doing Julius Caesar and it's set in the Roman Empire? Are we doing Lysistrata? And there's an important thing about the war. Are we going to set it? Just because you're doing Lysistrata doesn't necessarily mean you can't set it in 1968 with the Vietnam War being the war. The important thing about Lysistrata is that there's a war going on that the women are fighting against. And that's what makes it universal. because all societies throughout history have had some sort of conflict, wars that they go to. And I'm not just saying the women, but people are typically get tired of the war and are against the war. And so that's why Lysistrata can be more universal appeal than something like Julius Caesar, which tends to be set at a very specific time, very specific place, very specific person who has very specific faults and all those sort of things. Doesn't make it necessarily better or worse play, just that one is more easily adaptable to different situations. So it's harder to define exactly the given circumstances. And again, that's what we're looking for in the first level, is what the given circumstances are. What year is it? What day is it? Is it a Sunday, when everybody's at church? Is it a Friday and everybody's eating fish? Are they Catholic? Yes. How many characters in the play? Are they men? Are they women? Do they have to be? For instance, oftentimes nowadays we're in a cross casting, so you have somebody, for instance, you're doing Romeo and Juliet. There's not necessarily anything about Romeo and Juliet in the play itself that means they couldn't be Spanish, and you're doing a version that might be West Side Story, yes, or African American, or something like that. Now, for instance, if you're doing a production of Fences, I believe, because the nature of the play, Fences would be tough to take out of the African American community because the main character has the background of having played in the Negro Leagues. It's in the dialogue. It's in the dialogue, the second thing, so I'm skipping a little bit. But again, once you're looking at interpretation, you want to leave it open for, is it really important that it's on a specific day? Is it somebody's birthday? Yes, Crimes of the Heart happens on Lenny's birthday. Does she knows that? Does anybody else remember it? Well, through the course of the play, no, they don't. And they get embarrassed because they all find out it's Lenny's birthday. But Kraft's Last Tape, it's his 81st birthday. So a lot of times it's hard to find out if it's exactly things like that because it isn't just given to you. You sort of have to dig in the surface underneath a little bit to understand what time it is, what year it is, what is the societal situation like. Yes, do we have a king? Do we have a queen? Do we have a president? Are there wars? Were there wars? What was the background of these people? Did these people fight in wars? For instance, Death of a Salesman happens around 1940. One of the good questions about the play, if you said it in 1943, for instance, why aren't Biff and Happy in uniform? Why aren't they at war? Yes, if we're in the 43 and we're in the Second World War and they're 30-year-old men, well, okay, maybe they have some malady. Maybe they have, a foot spur or something like that. Yes, I don't know. But what you want to do is find the answers to things that are just given circumstances. Whose uncle is who's related to who's sleeping with who. Yes. Sometimes, again, those things are choices that can be made during the production process. And so, for instance, who is sleeping with who might be something that comes out in rehearsal. But it is also something that you need to understand and know if it's important to the play beforehand. Yes, because before you get into casting and all these other things, you need to know how these characters are going to work with each other. Yes, so given circumstances, hopefully that makes sense of what those are. Second is dialogue. Dialogue is the only true source of interpretation. If nobody says it, then it doesn't have to be any particular way. Yes, and for those playwrights in the audience, you can turn your ears off for a second. But if they say it in the play, let's say they say her eyes are gorgeous green eyes, well, you can change it. If the actor has blue eyes, actress has blue eyes, you can change it. Or you can put in contact lenses. Or you can make it far enough away that you don't think anybody can see it. Or the person could just be wrong, right? It doesn't make my brown eyes blue, yes? But if someone during the course of the play says something about it, for instance, we talked about Death of a Salesman just a second ago, there's only one real-time reference in the play, and it's an odd one. Willie at one point talks about Simonizing his 1926 Chevy, which means when the boys were young, they would go out and wash his car, which was a 1926 Chevy. So, if he's going to say those words, that means A, it's got to be in America, because Chevrolet is the only place that it was sold in 1926. The boys have to have been some age where they could wash a car in 1926. So setting it in 1980 would be very difficult, because that would make the boys, 80, 90 years old, and Willie would be 120. So, but that doesn't mean you can't say Simonizing my 1966 car, something like that, to change the date. But that has to be a conscious choice that you're going to make. Because once you make that, once it's set it in the dialogue, that is going to become the way that it has to be in production, or it's going to cause questions. Yes? So look at the given circumstances, where you're setting the play can alter a little bit, right? Depending upon your interpretation, we talked about style, we'll talk about style in a little bit, we'll talk about concept in a little bit, but right now we're just talking about play analysis, yes? So as you're going through the play and analyzing the play, just look through the dialogue. Now, one of the things about dialogue, or any kind of words that are in the play, there are going to be words that you may not completely understand. For instance, in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, they keep talking about mendacity. My guess is, unless you've seen the play before, you probably have never heard anybody use the word mendacity, and even if you've heard other people use it, you're probably not comfortable using it in your own speech. Mendacity means a person who lies, but not only a person who lies, but a person who gets off on lying. Somebody who would rather tell you a lie in order to mislead you than tell you the truth. Yes? I'm not going to point to any particular person, but my guess is you can all think of somebody that may be president of the United States currently who might be a little mendacious. Certainly there are people around him who are, but get the politics out of this. In the course of the play, they use the word mendacity a lot, and you have to know what it means and what they mean when they say it and how they use it. Yes. Again, sometimes you have to be very careful. For those of you who heard this story, I apologize, but I'm going to tell it again because it points out the fact that you can overanalyze things. We were doing a production of Guys and Dolls, which doesn't seem like it'd be that difficult to analyze. That's about a bunch of guys and a bunch of dolls. But in the play, there's a scene toward the end where everybody's going to a wedding, and one of the characters says that he needs a KWYSANTIUM. And so, of course, you're just reading the play. None of us who are in the production team had ever done the play before. And so we see this word, and the director in our first production meeting says, this word, KWYSANTIUM, means, she had looked it up, and it is a Romanian word for window shade. So the prop master is making notes, window shade, we need a window shade. And the director says, obviously, since it's from Romania, they may need some sort of Romanian spark to their costume. So the costume designer right now, Romanian, we'll have whatever people in Romania wear. Yes, do research on Romanian costumes yet. We get to the first read through, and the character's name was Harry the Horse. And the director says, of course, Harry, you are Romanian. And fortunately for everybody involved in the production, the person playing Harry the Horse had done the production before and said, what are you talking about? I'm from Brooklyn. He says, well, this word, KWYSANTIUM, is the Romanian word for window shade. He started laughing and said, lady, the man's from Brooklyn, he doesn't know how to say chrysanthemum. And of course, everyone immediately realized that Harry the Horse was correct. That chrysanthemum is just the strange way a guy from Brooklyn would try to say chrysanthemum. And so the costume designer is scratching out Romanian, the prop designer is scratching out window shade. So again, do your research, exhaust your research, but do not assume that just because you have analyzed it to the nth degree, you have followed the correct trail. There are still things you may not be aware of in the production, just because you may not be fully aware of past productions and other ways of producing the play. Yes, so be careful, be wary. Now, let's talk about interpretation. Ultimately, this analysis is going to lead to your concept, which is your interpretation or the director's interpretation of the play. We'll talk about styles, like I said, in the future. But one of the major styles is realism. And one of the things about plays is that whether you are in the moment or whether you're in some sort of flashback or whether you're in some sort of fantasy world, doesn't matter where you are, everything on stage in a play is happening now. It is all current, yes? And so there's oftentimes a confusion when young professionals in the theater, when we talk about realism, they somehow interpret that as it really is there. It's always really there, yes? What makes it realism is that in realism, you're pretending that the objects on stage are as they would be in life. If you ever have a play with a ghost in it, Hamlet, first thing you see is a freaking ghost. Hamlet is not realistic because there's a ghost in it, okay? Ghosts, in case you weren't aware, ghosts are typical of realism. You don't see, hear, smell, touch, taste ghosts in real life. And if you do, you need to talk to somebody. If you have flashbacks, yes, Death of a Salesman has flashbacks. So even though there are absolutely realistic moments in Death of a Salesman, yes, Death of a Salesman is not a realistic play because you have to flash back to 20 years before. And so in order to do that, you have to have some other form, some of the style of interpretation that is non-linear, yes? Realism is always linear. Fences, absolutely realism. Linear in every way. Very similar in the story, the subject matter and the way it's told to Death of a Salesman, yes? About parents having problems with their children and all that sort of stuff, but striving to achieve the American dream, yes? There are parts of each play which hearken to one another, but in the case of Death of a Salesman, it is non-realistic, non-linear. And in the case of Fences, it is written to be realistic. Does that mean you have to do it realistically? No. That's the part of interpretation. What do we need to do this play, which is the third part of your analysis, is the dramatic action. You know what the characters say, you know where they are and when they are. The dramatic action are the movements the characters made on stage and the way they relate to their environment. Yes, is the background or walls physical or are they suggested? Just because it's in the parentheses doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there on stage. One of my favorite stories involving my good friend Cody. We were doing a production of Helvetica, was the name of the play. The very first thing in the parentheses didn't even have a dialogue. Didn't even say when and where we were. The first thing it says is there's a screen door. There's a screen door. And then it told us about the characters and the places and things, and then you have the dialogue, you have the play. Well, the play takes place inside of people's heads. There's backward and forward time movement. You've got bears that talk. There's all kind of non-realistic things. The problem with the screen door is that it means in order to hold a screen door up, you have to have walls. In order to have walls and screen doors, you're creating a reality. Yes? The screen door could have been done with a sound effect, and that's the way we did it. But the author doesn't necessarily know, isn't really doing and describing a theatrical production. The author is merely writing down the way they see the play. And so just because it's written in the parentheses doesn't mean it has to be there. Now, could it be there? Sure. We could have certainly put a screen door in the play, but then the screen door isn't referred to or even used until the middle of the second act. And for an act and a half, you'd have people going, what is the screen door on the stage for? What's the importance of the screen door? Now, if you can find in the dramatic action some sort of metaphor, we talk about Fences. Fences is a great metaphor for that play. It's such a good metaphor for the play, it's the name of the play. Yes? The fact that he is building walls around himself and his family is exactly what the play is about. He has been hurt by society and is going to save his children and his family from that hurt, that pain that the real world brings by building a fence which not only keeps him inside but keeps the world outside. So a fence, in the sense of Fences, is a great metaphor. In Doll's House, a doll's house is a great metaphor. It's the name of the play. Right? So don't discount the name of the play as far as finding metaphors which can lead to interpretations, which can lead to things like how the set is designed or how the actors interact with the set. Yes? So as a director, you're looking for those little clues. As a stage manager, you're trying to understand why those clues are being used, or what the need or the necessity is. So for instance, if you have an understudy that comes in, or somebody who's recast, you can, the director can, doesn't have to be there when you explain the history or the importance of individual movements, or that sort of thing. Dramatic action, obviously, are the verbs. Verbs will tell you the bigness, the largeness. Again, this goes back to cast size. You have 20 people all running around chasing each other. That's going to take a certain amount of room. Is there a huge ballroom dancing scene? Yes. Or is it everything intimate? In which case things can be closer together. You don't need as much space. And again, you can appear to be claustrophobic. One of the things about the stage is that appearances can be very deceiving, especially in the, you have the X, Y, which is left, right, and then you have the Z axis, which comes backward and forward. And that Z axis, it's very difficult for an audience to understand depth. Left to right, they can see very quickly, very easily. But you can have a lot of room forward, back, that doesn't look like a lot of room, because it can still be very condensed left to right, if that makes sense. Finding out what the characters, how they move, yes. Again, the adjectives, the objectives, what do the actors want? So do they want to kill the main character? Do they want a stab seizure? That's mass action, yes. Do they want, is it a love story? What story are we telling? What are the adjectives telling us? How quickly, we'll get to adverbs in a second, but we'll get to pacing in a second. Those are the adverbs. But the adjectives are how we're going to interact to the surroundings, yes? And so finding out those sort of things will tell you things like, how large the dresses are, how large the furniture is, how much room do you have in your areas as you move around the stage, yes? Is it all in one day? Does it take place is there nighttime scenes? Is there crickets? What kind of ambience do you have? Do you have the sound of lightning and thunder? Do you have the sound or effects of fireworks? What are the other things that are happening on the course of the play? Yes, those are the ideas that you're looking for in the play. Yes, how they relate to one another. Why did the playwright write the play? That's an excellent one. Figuring out what the objective of the playwright was can, a lot of times, lead you to the metaphors that will lead to the design concepts for the play. Was it something that was a personal tale of a family member? Is it something that, sometimes playwrights just write plays to make money. Don't get me wrong. A lot of Tennessee Williams plays were written just because he had these crazy idiots in his head. And so he just wrote them because he just wrote hundreds and hundreds of plays. He just kept writing and writing because he had so many ideas in his head. There wasn't really any mission that he had about. Now, were there a couple of times when he was able to create masterpieces that had vision, that had purpose? Sure. And one of the things about Tennessee Williams' work is he's trying to explain to the rest of the world what it is like to be a Southerner. Because we're a little bit slower, we're a little bit more laid back, it's a little hotter. And so things like Streetcar Named Desire, the way that Stella and Stanley interact, even though there's an abusive relationship, there's still a love relationship. Even though he rapes Blanche, yes, Stella still is in love with him, right? And so there are just differences of, he's not a king by any means, right? He's just a pauper, but his wife loves him, right? And so explaining that, or at least exposing that, and having people understand that type of existence, much more raw, much more animal. Not necessarily the way society reacts, but it's certainly the way that Stanley and Stella live together, yes? So understanding those type of things, what the idea of the play is, and what are they doing in the play, yes? Tempos, adverbs, how quickly, the pacing of the play. You want, if there are any kind of shifts in the play, lighting shifts and or scenery shifts and costume changes, all those things need to fit into the rhythm of the play itself. As you're analyzing your script and as you're coming up with the changes that you're going to need to do each scene, do furniture pieces move? Do we add a piece in Crimes of the Heart? Suddenly you have a cot in the second act that you didn't have in the first act. because Lindy is living in the kitchen there, so she pulls out the cot to sleep in. There are things that are added in Death Trap. The desk gets to be a partner desk at one point, so we got to get the desk on and off stage at intermission. And so there are just things get added to the play and how those things happen, and what's a shift in light is called an awe vista shift. An awe vista shift is in light. My rule of thumb is 7 seconds. If you can do a shift in the blackout in 7 seconds or less, the audience will maintain the storyline, they'll maintain the flow of the play, and they'll know where they are and what's going on. If the shift takes longer than 7 seconds, the audience is going to start wandering away, and it may not be the costume, it may not be the set, it may be costume changes that are that long. And if you're going to have a shift that lasts that long, turn on some blue lights. Give them something to look at or entertain themselves with. Have some music in the shift. And again, if you're going to have that in one shift to cover the shift, you got to do it in all of them. Consistency is very important. We'll talk about that in the next class period. But once you start making design decisions, once decisions get made about the pacing of the show, that sort of thing, you need to follow through. And it may be that one shift overrides the whole play, right? Or maybe that you may change your interpretation based upon the fact that you don't have time to do that shift, or you may add dialogue, or you may add a dance, or add a fight. There are ways of creating moments, right, that may not be scripted, that'll cover things like that. Yes, that's what, there's no business like show business. It's the best song from Annie Get Your Gun, the one we remember the most, but it was written to cover a scene change. They're out there singing, there's no business like show business, while the crew is changing from a train to a boat. That's why it's there, that's why it's in the script. Except that now we have this song that's the hit of the show. So what are you gonna do? Well, now when you do a production of Annie Get Your Gun, a lot of people will have a whole dance number to No Business Like Show Business, which sort of ruins the chance to change from a train to a boat, which is why it was written, right? So again, analyze the script, knowing why each thing is there, what its use in the play is, and finding the way that you're going to produce the play. Seventh thing, moods, the atmosphere. Again, this goes to metaphors. Abstraction, let's talk about this word. Realism, I'm going to say you understand. Dealing with doors, windows, you understand. Dealing with refrigerators, radios, that sort of thing, great. That's easily understood. When you're taking a play and moving it into an abstract plane where radios can just be sound effects, where doors can just be lighting gobos, where wind can just be a sound effect, or can just be acted by dancers, right? Suddenly you have Ariel in what's the Tempest come out, and she is the air, and she is just dancing around. That's an abstraction, right? And so it leads to abstract environments where anything is possible. So that's much more imaginative, and you're in a much different plane than you would be if you were dealing with a realistic plane, right? And it is the realm, I'm going to say that theater can work at its best. I think there are certainly plays, Crimes of the Heart, Offenses, it'd be tough to do them in an abstract environment. Not impossible necessarily, but it would be tough because they deal so much with the real world in real time and real issues. A woman shooting her husband, a man and a son, coming to grips over the fact that he wants to be his own man, and the father's saying, no, you can't. Those are real issues in real time. Things like Ariel being in the Tempest, where you've got magic and you've got the whole world as your possibility. Those are abstractions, and really the world of visual is your plane. How you got lighting designers working with set designers, working with costume designers. That's what the collaborative method is all about. Working with the dancers, working with actors, working with singers. It very quickly can get to be what is called postmodernism, where you have several different stimuluses going all at once. You have sound that's doing one thing, you have lights doing another thing, you have the visual dancers, singers doing another thing. Blue Man Group is, for instance, an example where they're banging on drums and got music playing and sound effects going on and all kind of crazy stuff. It makes sense on some ethereal plane, but it's not necessarily something that you can write in words, because it's beyond words. It's visual. It's a visual world. And that's the world we live in. And so one of the things I'm going to encourage all of you to do, try to encourage you to do, is to let go of the comfort of reality. Yes, there's just a comfort in having things, couches, chairs that you're familiar with. And so moving beyond those things into the world of abstraction is a step. Sometimes you want to put your foot in a little bit before you dive whole hog, and some of you may just be going whole hog. Let's go for the abstractions. Yes, and in art, we have abstract artists, right? Cubists, for instance. Picasso has his realistic period, but he also has his blue period, where you got women that have two faces, guitars that look like, a train wreck, right? Dali is definitely abstractions, right? And so in art and literature and sculpture, there are all kinds of examples of this that you can use to base your production on, right? And use them as leaping off points, right? We'll talk much more about research in a couple weeks, but again, this is just an example of how you go through a play, and in the course of reading the play, begin to visualize the production that you're going to perform eventually. Yes, you don't want to get too specific too quick, because you're going to be tied to the specifics soon enough. But at least early on, you want to let your mind roam. Imagine the possibilities, right? Talk to other people. That's the joy of production meetings. Have the costume designer have the ideas, have the lighting designer have ideas, set designer have ideas, director brings in his ideas or her ideas. You need to be prepared to have the answers if those other people fail in their analysis. But you also need to be open to that type of interpretation. When you get to casting, for instance, we'll talk about casting in a couple weeks. Just because you have envisioned the person as being a 6'1", overly gregarious Santa Claus type figure, doesn't necessarily mean that a thin black man couldn't play the role, given the proper set of situations, right? And again, you have to see how the actors work with one another in the audition process, because the feel that you get between the actors is gold, right? If you're trying to have people who are in love with each other, it's much easier to have people who have an attraction toward each other rather than people who are repellent to one another, who really have to act through that. Yes, and you'll also find less problems in rehearsals and off stage as well. So anyway, hopefully this little bit of play analysis will help, and we'll talk more about the theater itself next time. See you then.